Chinese Communist Party claims that it has never taken 1 inch of land from other countries. But even China's friendliest and most peaceful neighbors are finding that to be a lie. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Did you know that you don't have to worry about wars and global conflicts anymore? Because Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently assured everyone that China will safeguard world peace. So the Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Hamas, and soon-to-be Iran wars are all over. Hooray! Someone should probably tell Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Hamas, and Iran. In a speech given about a month ago at a celebration for the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, Xi said that Beijing will always stand on the right side of history and human progress, and promote world peace and tranquility and human progress. And when a Chinese leader declares himself a champion of human progress twice, I guess it must be true. He's definitely helping the progress of the Uyghurs from alive to dead. But back to Xi's dedication to world peace. In fact, here is Xi a few weeks later in Anhui province, where he inspected the army's weapons of mass tranquility, great tools for promoting human progress. During the inspection, Xi urged the troops of the Chinese Army's rocket force to boost their deterrence and combat capabilities. Definitely the words of a champion of world peace. But that's the message Xi and the Chinese Communist Party keep sending out, over and over and over again, that China under the CCP is peace-loving, open, and upholds humanity's common values, that China is a force for peace, stability, and progress in the world. And then there's one of my personal favorites, that since the founding of the People's Republic, China has never started a single war or conflict and has never taken 1 inch of land from other countries. Okay, let's play along for a moment and roll with the CCP's rhetoric here. Let's say that the brutal repression carried out by the Chinese authorities in places like Tibet and Xinjiang are not violations of peace, stability, and human progress, but are instead a domestic affair that the international community has no business looking into. Let's also say, for argument's sake, that the CCP was not acting aggressively, but merely defending China when it launched border attacks against its well-armed neighbors, India and the Soviet Union, in the 1960s. And invaded Vietnam in 1979. Let's also throw in that more recent hostile and coercive maneuvers by Chinese forces around Taiwan and in the South China Sea are not a matter of Chinese imperialist expansion, but are all about upholding China's territorial integrity, as well as countering malicious U.S. military interference, of course. For the sake of argument, let's say all that is true. Then what about China's friendly neighboring nations that pose no military threat and are not claimed as inalienable parts of China? They're totally safe, right? Because the CCP would never, ever, ever start a single war or conflict or take 1 inch of land from other countries. Unfortunately, events of recent years show what we knew all along. The CCP is lying. In 2022, for example, a leaked report from the government of Nepal obtained by the BBC accused China of encroaching into Nepalese territory along the two countries' shared Himalayan border. So I guess China was technically right when they said they didn't take a single inch of land. They took thousands of inches. Now, this is despite the fact that the two countries have moved closer economically and politically throughout the years, with Chinese diplomats reportedly even playing a major role in trying to reconcile some of Nepal's feuding communist parties, and that the shared border between the two had already been settled in a series of treaties signed in the early 1960s. And as we all know, China respects treaties and international law and has never shown itself to be a threat. According to the report, a Nepalese task force sent to the border area to investigate local reports of Chinese border encroachment found that Chinese security forces had restricted religious activities of people on the Nepalese side of the border and had been limiting grazing by Nepalese farmers. It also found that the Chinese were building a fence around a border pillar and were attempting to construct a canal and a road inside Nepal. But that's nothing compared to what's happening in the nearby Himalayan nation of Bhutan. Bhutan is a small, landlocked country, slightly bigger than Maryland, with a population of around 800,000 people, about the same as North Dakota. For much of its modern history, the country's leadership has followed a neutral and even at times isolationist stance towards the outside world, as well as towards its two large neighbors, India and China. That also means that it has stayed out of military conflicts with other nations. It has no navy, no air force, and its small army has repeatedly been ranked as the weakest in the world. Which of course means they're a major threat that China will have to deal with. Foreshadowing. In terms of relations with its northern Chinese neighbor, Bhutan and Beijing signed a treaty back in 1998, in which they both proclaimed mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and agreed to refrain from taking any unilateral action to change the status quo of the border, essentially promising each other that neither one will encroach on the other's territory. And of course, China kept its word, because China respects treaties and international law and has never shown itself to be a threat. Foreshadowing. Already before that in the 1980s, Bhutan tried to show good faith by relinquishing its claim to a 154 square mile stretch of land called Kuala Kari in its northern border with China. Despite all this, however, Bhutan has come under increasing pressure from Beijing. The Chinese have built massive infrastructure with hundreds of concrete structures, military posts, and administrative centers in multiple locations inside Bhutanese territory. Satellite imagery shows that much of this construction has been focused on raising 22 settlements, with a report from last month documenting how the Chinese authorities are in the process of relocating or have already relocated about 7,000 people from inside China to these settlements at great expense. Accompanying the Chinese civilians is an unknown number of officials, border police, and military personnel, armed with human progress projectiles. 8 of these settlements have been built in the western part of Bhutan, close to a region where the borders of Bhutan, China, and India intersect around a strategically important plateau named Doklam. According to experts behind last month's report, these villages have most likely been built in order to provide the Chinese military with better access to Doklam, which would give Chinese forces a major strategic advantage if another confrontation were to break out with India. China has so many conflicts, they start new conflicts to help them win their other conflicts. It's like a conflict turducken, which is when a turkey murders a duck that murders a chicken. Control over Doklam would place the Chinese army in an excellent position to block India's 14-mile wide Siliguri corridor, also known as the Chicken's Neck, which is the only land bridge connecting India to its 7 northeastern states. But apart from the 8 settlements near the Doklam Plateau, there are 14 other settlements that have been built by the Chinese in areas of northeastern Bhutan. Some have even been placed in this region, which is deemed sacred by Bhutanese, with the country's royal family tracing its ancestral heritage to the area. Someone views something other than the CCP as sacred? Well, they can't have that. They have to trample their entire belief system and destroy their history as peacekeepers. Northeastern Bhutan is an area that offers no strategic value to China. So why are they doing this? Well, according to Professor Robert Barnett, an expert on the history of the region and co-author of last month's report, Beijing's reason for annexing them was more or less explicitly to place diplomatic pressure on Bhutan. Pressure that has increased as Beijing has plied on new territorial claims, all in an attempt to force the Bhutanese government to yield the Doklam Plateau. So really, what China is doing is all about its geopolitical rivalry with India, but the real damage being done here is to Bhutan, a country incapable of being a threat to China, and whose king in the 1970s even coined the term gross national happiness, saying that it was more important than gross domestic product, GDP. So China is basically bullying the world leader equivalent of Mr. Rogers. Official voices in China constantly accuse the US of using states like the Philippines and Taiwan in an evil game to contain and weaken China. But here, we actually have Beijing not only using a defenseless country in its own geopolitical schemes, but even occupying parts of its territory for use as leverage. All of China's accusations are just projections, which are their second worst projections after their human progress projectiles. At the same time, Beijing is in breach of its own peace and tranquility treaty with Bhutan from 1998. It's also blatantly turning its back on its own rhetoric about never taking an inch of another country's land, when even some of China's friendliest and most non-threatening neighbors, like Bhutan and Nepal, are faced with Chinese encroachment on their territory. Besides the CCP's obvious violations here, the harmlessness of Nepal and Bhutan could be part of the issue too. Professor Barnett argues that the reason why China has chosen this hard-fisted tactic against Bhutan may be because it rightly calculated that the cost would all be Bhutan's. The experience of Bhutan and Nepal should therefore stand as a warning to China's other neighbors that a soft approach towards the Chinese government will be viewed as weakness. And if they discover they can exploit a power imbalance to take land from a neighboring country at no cost to themselves, there's nothing stopping them from doing so. All the cozy CCP rhetoric about peace and respect is just a smokescreen. Behind it towers the cold, calculating presence of an expansionist power that only promotes this type of human progress. And since it's almost the US presidential election, check out this video I made about nationalism and the story of how George Washington became a god. Click here and let me know what you think. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.